House of Chimeras presents History of the Therian Community, Part 1, 1993 to 1997. Citations can be found in the video description, and full bibliography can be found at the end of the video. There is a community for those who are, feel, and/or believe that they are non-physically one or more non-human animals on an integral and personal level. It is a subculture alive and well today with members across numerous continents. The Therian community, once known as the Were community during its early years, can solidly trace back its history as a community as it is today to the year 1993. In interest of their experiences, people have created websites, videos, books, and more. Further over the years, outside the community, references to it have occurred in books, documentaries, news articles, and even scholarly works. This is a step back in time to how the community began. What would become the Therian community would first take root after the creation of the news group called Alt Horror Werewolves on November 16, 1992. During this time, the internet was just about to begin to carry commercial traffic. The news group, often simply abbreviated as AHWW, was originally created to be a place where fans of werewolves across different kinds of media, from movies to books to even folklore and beyond, could discuss anything related to the topic. The news group would gain a new function next year in 1993, around November, when members began to proclaim themselves to being werebeasts in a spiritual sense and discuss the topic to others. The beginning of this started on November 7, 1993. On this day, a member by the name of Ron made a topic discussing his intense and very frequent dreams throughout his life of being a bat or a werebat. He also mentioned that he felt that bats were his, quote, personal spirit, unquote. Afterward, that same day, a member called Weasel created another thread where he noted he had once channeled the archetype of the wolf, which caused him to feel claws, teeth, and fur on his body. Some weeks later, on November 29, 1993, Ron created a topic talking about another dream he had, and again mentioned his identification as a werebat in some way. The next day, on the 30th, the member Katmandu created a topic titled Mental Transformations, in which he talked about a non-physical transformation of sorts. Katmandu also talked about a story involving more spiritual werewolves. That same day, a member going by the handle of The Tiger That Stalks Net posted a topic where he talked about having read several discussions on weres in general, and not just werewolves, as well as topics on real-life people associating themselves as animals, and how such feelings affected how they acted. He went on to state he simply was a tiger in personality, and stated that he was in some way simply a tiger that was in a human body. He stated outright that he was not claiming to be a physical were-tiger or anything, but rather just, in his own words, had, quote, a calling from the inside, end quote. He also stated how there were times when he had certain, quote, desires to slash with non-existent claws and move in ways that are impossible for bipeds to move, end quote. A few days later, on December 1st, Katmandu made a thread called Your Best Mental Transformation, where he talked again about the idea of mentally transforming rather than physically transforming, asking if any others had ever experienced times when they too felt in touch with animalistic instincts and behaviors in their own mind. Katmandu also asked if anyone else too had experienced regressions into animalistic states. Katmandu then went on to describe an experience he had while walking through the forest one day when he experienced a more animalistic feeling and felt more at home with being there. After this, a few other members began to chime in bit by bit with their own thoughts or experiences, ranging from what the idea of werewolves personally symbolized to them in stories and myth, to people finding themselves identifying as or with werebeasts in some sense personally on some of these threads. Looking back into the past, certain things sound very familiar to what a Therian might say at present day. Having dreams of being an animal one identifies with sounds a lot like dream shifting. Any mention of feeling animal characteristics on one's body that aren't actually there sounds a lot like phantom shifts. Mention of self-described mental transformations sound a lot like mental shifts, and certainly talk and identifying as a non-human animal in some way in a human body likely sounds very familiar to many Therians. Also, the use of the term were by The Tiger That Stalks the Net is also interesting due to the fact that the term would later become what was used to refer to animal-identified people for a number of years to come. Also, in December 1993, the use of the word phenotype to denote what animal one identified with first appeared. The earliest known use of the term in this manner was used on December 12, 1993, by Ron, who identified as a werebat. For many years after this, the word phenotype, among a few other terms, would be used by many. However, the word phenotype is a biological term about a physical characteristic of a genetic trait in which did not fit what was trying to be described, so many years later the term stereotype would take its place. However, that is many years down the road at this point in time. Also in this same thread, talk of there being self-described werebeasts other than wolves also came up, in that members pointed out that the newsgroup already had a werebat, weretiger, werepanther, and a weredragon in a spiritual sense as members. In the same thread, some days later, the fact that the word lycanthrope refers to wolves only was also brought up, and so lycanthropy didn't include other animals. One person proposed the term that could be used to describe all of them could be theriomorph, as well as keeping the term were still being used in a general sense as well. Between late 1993 and into early 1994, the use of the newsgroup had slowly changed. At first, it had only been a werewolf fan site, but was also becoming a place to discuss the topic of spiritually and personally being a were as well by some members. By early May 1994, the existence of some members being wares was well known among all members. Their sanity or rationale was debated among other members, with their thoughts ranging from seeing it as simply misinterpreting dreams, to thinking people were just role-playing, to mistaking spirit guides. On May 26 of 1994, the first draft of an FAQ for AHWW was posted. Much of the FAQ was over fictional werewolves, however already the FAQ addressed how a number of members personally identified as werewolves. One part of this early draft included this statement, quote, "When folks call themselves werewolves, they generally mean that they find the characteristics of lycanthropy intriguing and see examples of such in themselves. What those characteristics are and how they manifest themselves are, again, very personal and will no doubt vary from individual to individual," unquote. On July 21st, 1994, a member created a thread called Trans-speciesals, in which he talked about reading an article some time ago about people who are transsexual, which questioned the stereotype of sex equating gender, and vice versa, as well as how much acceptance they have gained. The member went on to mull over the idea of if people born as the wrong species would ever, quote, be at least accepted as something other than certified weirdos, end quote. With that, however, the creator of the thread left everything at that. The thread is interesting as it is the first time trans-species, well, in a way, would be used in the Therian community in some context or another. The Harvest Howl took place on a November weekend between the 18th and 20th in 1994, so that the howl took place around the full moon in the state of Ohio. It was estimated beforehand that at least 20, if not more, people were set to attend. However, the exact final number of people who actually attended was never stated. The Harvest Howl was the first gathering of members of all Toro werewolves to come together in real life to camp out. This howl, and others to come later, would allow members to socialize with others around campfires and enjoy the outdoors. An update of the All Toro Werewolves FAQ over the topic of Howl stated that, quote, "It's truly a recharge for batteries drained from mundane human existence," end quote. During the late summer and into fall of 1994, an aspect of the community that would come into existence, where it would remain in general popularity for years to come, would be the Werecard. A Werecard is a short questionnaire for the individual person in the community. The first use of a Werecard dates the first days of September in 1994. By mid-December in 1994, Werecards rapidly began to be posted by various members, and the questions of the Werecard standardized to how they would be known for nearly 2 decades. These early Werecards include standard fields such as a place for one's given name, called their human name on the Werecard, their personal name or username, called their were name on the Werecard, their birthday, their hobbies, and so on. Of course, considering All Toro Werewolves still being a place for werewolf fans to some extent, and was its original intention, there were also fields like favorite were art and favorite were movie. They also include fields more geared towards were, including a field for someone to note their phenotype. Because of the Werecards, it was also during this time that what species one identified with has began to very commonly be called one's phenotype after this point. Finally, the Werecard included a field called personal lycanthropy, where people could give a detailed explanation for their experiences and so on. Beginning by late 1994 and fully taking hold by 1995 was the coming of the term therianthropy to the budding community. Since coming into existence, members simply referred to themselves as werewolves, or before too long, simply weres for short. Also, the term lycanthropy began to be used by some members around this time. In December 1994, the idea of using therianthropy was put forward since there were plenty of non-wolf identified people on Altor werewolves. Since lycanthrope is literally Greek for wolf-human, while therianthrope is literally Greek for beast-human, the reasoning for which term to use between the two seemed fair to a number of members. It was also during this time frame that the word therianthrope was shortened to the slang use to Therian by members. However, the term were and use of were and then insert animal identified word here, certainly did not go away overnight, but rather these terms coexisted within the community in commonality for years to come. Around this time, the term shifter was also not uncommon. It was during this time, though, that the term spiritual therianthropy came into existence to emphasize that people were talking about their spirituality rather than claiming to be actually physically other than human. By January 1995, on the Werecards in the field that had once said personal lycanthropy began to show up as saying personal lycanthropy/therianthropy. Over time, it would become simply personal therianthropy on many Werecards later on over the years. During this time, another term began to appear in the growing were community, which was the term wereside. One of the earliest uses of the term was used in February of 1995. However, it didn't appear as common jargon on Altor werewolves until January of 1996. It would remain in common use for some years to come until the term were began to fall out of use. The use of the term wereside was an alternative word to phenotype to denote what animal one identified as. During the month of March in 1995, Bran Reader's Arbitron ranked Altor werewolves as the 2,541st most popular news group of all those included. It also noted that the readers of the news group was 77 of the estimated 22,318 that could have at that time worldwide. In April of 1985, between the 14th and 16th, Altor werewolves had its second howl. Named the Spring Thaw Howl, it took place on the Easter weekend, as well as during the weekend of a full moon. The howl once again took the form of a primitive camping trip for any members who wished to attend. After this howl, however, the number of members had grown so large and spanned across so wide distances that howls afterward were broken down into more regional events rather than one single huge event. Sometime during 1985, 25 members of Altor werewolves took part in a poll called the AHWW Poll 95. It was estimated that the news group had at least 100 members at the time. The results of the poll covered a number of things, including phenotypes, gender, average age, where they lived, if they felt they were born in the wrong body or not, and much more. In the poll results for phenotypes, wolves made up 56% of the 25 respondents, followed by bears, cats, and dogs, all at 8%, then lynx, panthers, and foxes at 4%. Gender distribution was 72% male and 28% female. Average age was 23.6 years old. Countries represented in the poll consisted of 56 being in the United States, 20% being from Australia and New Zealand, 16% from Canada, and 4% from Germany and the United Kingdom. As far as answering the question of if they felt they were born in the wrong body, 72% said no, while only 28% said yes. Starting in 1985 and really taking off by 1986 and onward, IRC chats began to be created for the growing were community to chat to one another in real time. And so began the slow move of the were community out into other parts of the now rapidly growing internet.